All right, well, this is the last section of chapter 14 on World War I, as part 4, the Russian Revolution. Before World War I, many people in Russia were unhappy with the extremely poor living conditions in Russia. Many wanted reforms to make their lives better. Unfortunately, Tsar Nicholas II did not want reforms. Some people wanted to overthrow the government. Now, in 1914, World War I makes Russia very patriotic, at least at first. The imperial government renamed St. Petersburg to Petrograd, meaning Peter's city, to remove the German word Berg, to make it less German and more Russian. But battle disasters caused a lot of unrest at home, and people started to blame Tsar Nicholas II. Now, this will lead to the March Revolution, the first of two revolutions that year in 1917. In March of 1917, revolts broke out in Russia. Nicholas is unsympathetic. The women's march through Petrograd for bread. A general strike shuts down all the factories. Nicholas is totally oblivious to what's going on, and he orders the soldiers to shoot at the protesters. And to his shock, they refuse, and some even join the protesters. Nicholas no longer has any support. So on March 17th, he abdicates. This would be the end of 300 years of Romanov rule. The Tsar and his family are now under house arrest. A Duma establishes a provisional government. It was led by a man named Alexander Kerensky. The new democratic government did not pull out of the war. They wanted to honor their treaties with the Allies. This was a mistake. It made many Russians angry with the new government. Now, the second revolution was called the October Revolution. It actually occurred in November, but because of the old calendar that Russia was still under, the dates actually fell in October. A group of communist revolutionaries called Bolsheviks become more powerful in Russia. Their leader was Lenin. Oh wait, not that Lenin. Oh yes, this Lenin. It was dedicated to violent revolution and to destroy the capitalist system. Here we see Lenin giving a speech. He was very good at that. This is one of the propaganda posters showing Lenin and the new communist flag, the hammer and sickle, and the star of communism. November of 1918, Lenin and the Bolsheviks overthrow the new Russian democratic government. They seized the Winter Palace, which was the headquarters of the new government, with very little bloodshed. Kerensky did escape and came to the United States. The power now passed to a new Council of People's Commissars, led by Lenin. Lenin promised peace, so he pulls out of the war with Germany, makes all the people of Russia happy, but it makes the Allies, France and Britain, very angry with Russia. Now, this is going to lead into the Russian Civil War. It's a 3-year civil war that lasts from 1918 to 1921. Now, there were a lot of people in Russia that were opposed to this new communist government. Anti-communists or anti-Bolsheviks, pro-monarchists, people who wanted to bring back the Tsar and the Tsarist government, and the Allies like Britain, France, and even the United States. So a civil war starts between the Bolsheviks or Reds, these were the communists, and the Whites, anti-Bolsheviks, pro-monarchist, and Allied soldiers. Now, in July of 1918, the Reds shock the world when they murder Tsar Nicholas II and his entire family. The Tsar and his family had been held in captivity since the abdication. Here we see a family photo taken in 1913 about 5 years before they were murdered. Sitting in his chair is Nicholas in his uniform. Behind him to the right is his wife, Alexandra. They had 4 daughters. The oldest, Olga, is to the left. She's about 17 years old in this picture. On the far right is Tatiana. Behind the Tsar, next to her mother, is the 3rd daughter, Maria. And the youngest daughter, Anastasia, has her arm around their only son, Alexei. Alexei's about 8 years old. After the abdication, the Tsar and his family was moved to a remote area east of Moscow, and they were going to be kept there until Lenin and the government could decide what to do with them. There they left a very simple life. Here we see Nicholas and his son Alexei sawing wood. Alexei's about 13 years old here. This was very different from the life they once led. On the night of July 17th, they were rounded up and brought downstairs along with their 4 servants, and they were being held in a room until they could get transportation, they were told, to another location. While they were waiting there, the guards walked in, pulled out pistols, and announced to them that they had been condemned to death by Lenin and the Soviet government, then proceeded to shoot everyone there and killing them. The bodies were taken to a remote area in the forest. They were chopped up and then dumped down into a well, and they poured sulfuric acid down. Now in 1979, 61 years later, they discovered the bones of the entire family, the servants, everyone but Alexei and the youngest daughter, Tatiana. In 1998, using DNA testing, they positively identified the Tsar and his children, at least the ones they had discovered. They did not know the whereabouts of Anastasia or Alexei. In 2007, not far away, in another excavation, they did discover the bones of the 2 youngest children. In 1998, they did have a funeral for Nicholas and Alexandra in the big cathedral in St. Petersburg. We could see them here in the marble tombs. Now, the whites had no common goal. They couldn't cooperate with each other. They didn't work together. While on the other hand, the reds had only one goal, and that was more effective. So in 1921, the Reds win the Civil War, and Lenin becomes the leader of Russia. 2.7 million people die in the Civil War. Soldiers from Britain, France, Japan, Canada, and even the United States, along with others, fought on the side of the whites. In a little-known fact, 13,000 U.S. soldiers fought in the Russian Civil War, and 279 Americans died there. Now, Russia becomes the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also known as the USSR, and it's referred to as the Soviet Union. That's the way to pronounce it with Russia in the Russian alphabet, but only Ms. Zarova could probably pronounce that for us. The Soviets changed their flag. The old Russian flag was out, and the new communist flag was in. We see a hammer and sickle. The hammer represents the factory workers, and the sickle represents the farmers, and above them is the star of communism. In theory, communism meant rule by the people. However, the reality was far different. It was ruled by the Communist Party, not the people. Like the old czars, they used the army and the secret police to keep the people under control. Basically, like the czars, they used terror. Now this ends our section on the Russian Revolution. Hope you enjoyed it, and have a nice day. Goodbye.